Sorry, trouble here with muting. Welcome. Rotary connects the world through celebrating our friendships, diversity and unity of purpose. Please welcome President Adriano Cisternino.
Thanks, Peter. Welcome everyone to our lunch meeting 4806, our 12th online meeting and our last regular meeting for this Rotary year. A very special welcome to our guest speaker, Michael Waite, who Vice President and Past President Peter Neal will more formally introduce later in the meeting. Welcome, Michael. Welcome also to any visiting Rotarians and other guests joining us today for our meeting. Birthday greetings this week. We've got George Alwood, whose birthday was last Monday, John Balderstone yesterday, Grant King today, Sonia Weiser on Friday, and Adrian Bambrick and Kay Dowling on Saturday. Happy birthday to you all. Celebrating their anniversary this week, we've got quite a few. We've got Sonia Weiser and Monica Oliphant. They've been with us for 2 years. Tony Brosnan, Brian Esselbach, and Anthony Gerard, 9 years. Christina Wilgos and Madeleine Weiser, 10 years. John McLaren, 12. Phil Hoffman, 19. And John Agnew, 20. Congratulations to you all. As usual, all important announcements will be shared by our bulletin each week and MailChimp emails, and also via our Facebook page and the WhatsApp group for last-minute notices. I have updates on the health of some of our members and friends. Our well-regarded member Brett McMurtry has in recent months been traveling on a rocky road with his health issues. You will recall that back in February he was diagnosed with cancer of the liver and had an operation to successfully remove it. His post-operative treatment was going well, but further cancer was found in his bones. This is being treated with regular chemotherapy at the Tennyson Center. Brett is being his usual positive self, but obviously is under some strain. If you want to contact him, we suggest that in the first instance you ring his mobile phone, which is listed in the directory. Ellen White is making remarkable progress following a recent stroke. She's now back at home, and her ability to look after herself is improving every day, principally due to the efforts of her son and daughter and the treatment through Hampstead. Her walking shows little effects from the latest stroke, and her speech is getting back to pre-stroke levels. Our thoughts are with them. As I said, today is our last regular meeting to go for this Rotary year, and what a year it has been. I just would like to remind you all that next week we will have our changeover meeting online starting at 12:45. So we start 15 minutes earlier with a special visit from our honorary member, His Excellency, the Honourable Hugh Van Ley, AC, Governor of South Australia, who is joining us at the start of the meeting to say a few words. Even though we won't be together in person, it will still be a very special meeting via Zoom. We will take you through a journey of the past year, announce some very special honorary members, welcome some deserving PHF recipients, and of course induct next year President's ID. I hope to see you all there next week. Like we've been doing in the last few weeks, after today's meeting, I will be setting up some breakout rooms. Please remember that you need to accept an invitation to join a room. Don't forget also that you can still contribute generously to our community projects by placing a donation in our virtual bowls on our website. I will share a link in the chat as soon as I hand over to Peter. And lastly, a reminder that we are recording these online meetings and they will be available on our social media channels and website as a podcast in a day or so. I will now hand over to our speaker source today, Vice President and Past President Peter Neal.
Thanks, Adri. A quick update under Spotlight on Service, folks. Members will be aware that our club, amongst many others, supports Hutt Street. One of the consistent supporters and drivers of our relationship with Hutt Street is Carol Proctor. I am pleased to advise that due to the work of Carol, Kay, Janine and others, Rotary Adelaide has added to the lion's share of support to provide environmentally friendly paper bags for client lunches. Also for NAIDOC Week, Calvary Hospital are having a yogurt drive with Fluoro milk, providing something wild yogurt. They use indigenous flavours in these yogurts, and the proceeds are going to our Nurture Kits program. We thought Rotarians might like to order them as well. Please contact Joe Fiedler. Small but important pieces of work in our community. Well done to our teams. On April 1 this year, the ABC reported News Corp said it will suspend printing of 60 community newspapers in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland and South Australia from April 9. Unfortunately, it wasn't an April Fool's joke. By mid-April, Australian Community Media, the publisher of more than 100 regional newspapers, closed 4 of its printing sites and suspended a number of non-daily papers. The Narracourt Herald, the paper Michael Waite's mother had worked on for 30 years, was one of them. Most recently, the latest closure was the Messenger Group. The reason? Well, the main reason given was COVID-19, but one suspects the underlying reason was a cost-saving measure. The panacea offered? Online versions of many titles would continue. Today's speaker did not accept this, as he truly understands the value to a local community of a hard copy newspaper. People like Joe McLaren and David Egan, Narracourt stalwarts, would appreciate the need for a local community newspaper. And those especially in regional areas who may not be as tech savvy as others. Michael's quoted as saying, "The newspaper in a town of this size and calibre is such a pivotal communication engine." To share his story from high finance to local news, please welcome Michael Waite, the publisher of Narracourt's new hard copy print newspaper, The News. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much. I am going to share my screen. Good afternoon, everybody. Does that screen come through okay?
Yes, mate.
And can you hear me okay? Whether you want to or not. All right. Well, thank you for having me. So grateful to be a part of this and to, the incredible work that Rotary does. And I'm going to touch on it, how it's intersected with my life a little bit along the way. But I'll start with my sister was a member of Rotary Club of Sydney up until she moved to London less than 2 years ago. So she was passionately involved as she worked for UNICEF Australia there, and had an incredible experience there and the like. So, but without further ado, I'm going to jump in, and I called today's talk Passion Projects. Obviously Narracourt News, this new newspaper in Southeast South Australia, has attracted way more attention than we ever thought would happen when I committed to starting up a small community newspaper. But we're grateful for it, and it's the latest passion project. But I've also begun looking at my life in the last 5 to 10 years as kind of a series of passion projects, be it a focus on family, a focus on work, a focus on projects like this one. So that's the title. And again, I'm just thank you for having me today. And I'm going to just move through the 3 sections I'm going to cover. The Narracourt News. I realize that's the topic of the day. I'd like to share a little bit about the experience so far and what's next. Then work backwards. So I had the last 20 years in the US and my experience there, and how that perhaps contributed to what we're doing today. And then before that, my upbringing, hometown, born in Narracourt, and the first 20 years of life in Australia. And of course, I look forward to questions. So how on earth does a finance person come out and launch a community newspaper? Well, it was something maybe I regret right now at some days, but it's been a really, it's been a whirlwind. And to think that it was well thought out would be completely misleading. So hopefully this timeline gives you a flavor. We just heard that the legacy newspaper suspended operations on April 9th. Again, if I was connected to the industry, I might have known that, but I didn't. Later that week, the former owner of the Herald rang just to see how my mum was doing. My mum's fighting, well, she's in the final phase. She's got terminal stage 4 uterine cancer. And so we're just trying to make the best of the time we have, but he calls and just checks in on her. She worked for him for 35 years at the Herald, that he'd sold back in 2010, and she'd retired a couple of years later. And he was just seeing how she was doing, and then told me about this. I was like, golly, that just, what else can go wrong in a country town during a pandemic? And it just sort of sat with me on sort of Wednesday, Thursday. We were already taking Mum home on the Friday, the 17th of April, to just have a week at home. She hadn't been home since November 1st, when we were met in Normanville, Carrickawinga, to have a family, in theory, a great family summer. We were on a trip that I'll explain in a minute. But in the end, it had become, frankly, a train wreck in terms of she, later in November, after we arrived home, diagnosed with cancer, surgery. So literally had only been home for an Australia Day award ceremony where she got an award for her work with Sir Optimus International, and otherwise hadn't been home in 6 months. So we rented a house in Narracourt so that Mum and Dad could be at home. We would be at the other house because we've got 3 kids under 7 who are very big germ factories, and Mum was still coming off the last round of chemo. So we had to keep our distance at the time. We've been in COVID-19 isolation since last November with chemo. But anyway, that week turned into a series of phone calls on the way down to Narracourt, the drive home. And it just kept making sense of like, well, someone should do something about this newspaper and get it going. And my goal was to find someone in the community to do it. And I'd just sort of maybe support them with some money or just, you know, help out a little bit. That plan didn't work out very well either. April 20th, day one. So I'd spent the weekend running numbers, picking my mum's brain a little bit about how advertising works in the local town. I'd grown up with it, but really in the details. The former owner of the Herald offered some counsel, and I was like, golly, this might work. Like just enough to be sustainable, not a career for me, but just a sustainable business model. And so I went into day one of meetings on April 20th with 3 parts of the business, which I assumed one of them would fall apart, and then it would kill the idea, and I'd move on and enjoy the rest of the week at home. And that was, was there people in the community, local leaders that wanted a newspaper? You know, was this even a loss to the town? 2, could you sell advertising, and could someone produce the newspaper? Was there someone that could actually create one? And 3, would someone print the newspaper? Well, by the end of day one, literally day one, it was very clear that the community leaders would get behind it. So again, a very Rotary-like appeal, right? You go to the community, do you want it? And then all of a sudden you get these great people that, like Rotary does so often on the other side of it, comes at the challenge and goes, absolutely, we should do this. So we had really good support from that. We had a production company, a local graphic design company that said, gee, we'd love to help. We'll fit our costs around whatever you can absorb. The third one was printing. Couldn't figure that one out, but that was kind of the least problem anyway. I'd go figure that out later. And I can answer questions about why that was such a cluster if it's interesting. But anyway, we charged on. And frankly, 2 days later, I'd raised just enough seed capital that I got the buy-in of this community. It was a really strategic capital to get us going. And frankly, from then, it was every much of a cluster as you'd expect. We went from nothing to our first issue hitting the street on May 6th. So it was just an insane 16 days, 2.5 weeks, literally just that falling asleep, head on the keyboard kind of concept, and just trying to beg resources to come in. And then we had people coming out to help us and volunteer. On the right of the screen, you get to see, this was the top half of the page that I went to investors with. It was a 1-page prospectus, which you can appreciate how thin that was. But it was essentially just trying to pitch that I think I had passion. We have to hold local councils to account in a positive way about successes and the challenges and the priorities of our community. And really that was it. So I'll jump ahead. The mission and the method. The mission was really clear to me as I was listening to people, what they valued in it. And that was just comprehensive coverage of local news, activities, and sports. Simple, clean. We haven't deviated from the moment we wrote that statement down. And it's really the bedrock. It's kind of our superpower, so to speak. The method of how we do it, this is where it's a journey. I don't think you ever get there, but, and boy, it's a lot of re-educating the community, because this is where I will tell you, I think that the newspaper industry and frankly the media industry has lost its way, and the community itself, and that is creating a culture of mutual respect, accountability, and transparency within the community. And I can expand on that, but in questions if you like. But essentially that was, yes, we have to work hard and do the best quality stories we can and focus on the content. But there's also a level of community engagement in a paper like this, because we don't have the resources to have dozens of journalists around. The community has to be willing to engage with us, make it time to give us a few minutes, write a few things, take a picture, and ebb and flow with our resources. And then every decision I was making, for good or bad, and the good decisions and the bad decisions and all the mistakes, were really around these two other objectives around sustainable operations. And that is a profit margin that's just enough to be able to reinvest in the business and have internships and reinvest in those reporting resources, and also to absorb small shocks. I wasn't going to build this so that you could have no income for 12 months, but enough that you could just absorb bad issues from advertising, or someone being ill, or whatever. And then the other part was bringing my corporate experience into the game, and that was de-risking these regional businesses, which is very hard to do given they're small, but really centralize around something I've done a lot in corporates, which is teams of 3, because essentially 2 people can cover what 3 do in most scenarios. But when you're below that, you really do struggle. When 2 people are doing something, one goes away or gets sick, it really starts falling apart. And also trying to create multiple vendor partnerships where I could. So that was underlying. And then from there, how do you get this paid for? Look, the dream would be to have advertising. And my first underwriting model just had advertising. $10,000 an issue. That would cover, so it's essentially just work on 50 issues a year, $500,000. Could we get it done? It was going to be really tight, but I thought that was the answer. Make the newspaper free. One of the investors, the little strategic investor, said, look, I think people will pay $2. That's fine. Don't worry about it. Get them involved. And I was like, oh, I really resisted it. But then got around it when I suddenly realized I went to talk to the news agent, and they're like, oh, look, we're struggling. Could we get 30 cents, 50 cents a copy? And I was like, you know what? That's a good enough reason. Let's charge for it so I can give the news agent 50 cents and the people that sell our newspaper. So it became that virtuous circle. Again, I would call it a Rotary-like quality. And then I got greedy, of course. I'm like, oh, well, if I make it $2, I can give 25 cents to every charity, or a charity. And I was like, great, this is it. So we're going to sell it for $2. The predecessor newspaper was $1.75. And we're going to have a give back program. And of course, all the old school newspaper people are like, you don't give away money because you don't make any in this industry. So and I was like, no, I think this is a virtuous circle. I think we're going to just do it. And 25 cents for every copy we sell, we're going to give it away. And so we started making money from advertising and then newspaper sales, but it was still not enough. So advertising, I've learned, has come right now in a current environment about $7,500 an issue on average through 7 issues. Newspaper sales gets us sort of between $1,000 and $1,500 after I'll call distribution costs. So that gets us to $8,500 a week. So we're still about $1,500 short. So something that's done a lot in the US, and it's done some areas around Australia, I think, are these sponsorships and memberships. And that's what you see on the screen are the offerings there. And again, I'll be happy to answer questions about them. But these programs, I just needed one of them to do all right. The dream would have been both. And if they both failed, it was probably going to take down the business. Well, I'm really glad after 2.5, close to 3 weeks of marketing them just to our community through a little flyer, leaflet, and then putting some ads in the paper, we've got to about 14, 15 sponsors and about $40,000, and memberships are up to about 50 members and about $9,000. So, my sort of baseline goal was 25,000. That would be essentially $500 an issue. 50,000 is my real fundamental baseline goal. So we're getting there. We're sort of, I think my numbers are like 47, 48,000. The $75,000 mark in the back of my mind gets us to where that's good enough. Like, we can run this thing for a year, sustainable, and we've got a game. And so we're getting in that visibility, which is awesome. The community membership is nothing more than just people joining it. Like I've sold it just like joining your football club. Like, I grew up, I'm sorry to say this, people, because there was no AFL at the time. It was VFL. I was a member of the Carlton Footy Club for $30 a year. And that's what that membership for families does. and then they get a sticker, a free classified, and a couple of other little things. And the sponsorship package is what you said, the sponsor firm. It's a bit like buying the sign at the football ground. It's another way of I've been selling it. It's like, because people didn't know what sponsoring the newspaper meant, frankly. So this one's took a little bit of education, but people are getting behind it. Like, it's really exciting. And I'm so grateful, because frankly, it's the only way we had to wait. So after 57 days, you don't normally have a goal for the next 47 days, but this has been such a crazy launch startup that we do have a plan for the next 45 days. And it feels like, I'll call it phase 2 or 3 of our company. And we've got 3 big things we have to get done. And otherwise this will be gone from being, looked at as a hopeful, aspiring newest newspaper in the country on May 6th to being perhaps one of the shortest lived newspapers in the history of Australia. But I think we're up for running here. We've got to navigate the Australia community media re-entry into, I'll call it Australia, or reawakening. We've got to achieve the fundraising goals that I mentioned. I think we're doing well, but sponsorship and membership campaigns that running over the next 30 days, to the remaining 30 days. And then I've got to complete the team stabilization and independence, which is, yes, I'm working for free, I'm passionate about it, I love it, but clearly that's not the sustainable model for my family or my life, but it works. Look, it's a passion project, it's a community project. And again, I'm preaching to the choir of people that do this all the time in so many ways, and that. So, but I've got to ensure the team is stable and set up, and I can function more as the chair of the newspaper and the board, and provide support, oversight, and governance. And of course, that will be active for a while. It won't be done in 45 days, but I got to keep challenging myself to move in that direction. So again, happy to answer questions as we get there. I just want to now head towards the building blocks. And so in June of last year, my wife and I decided, and I'll give my wife deserves more, she had more courage than I did. We decided to leave our jobs and take the girls, our 3 daughters under 7, on a 12 to 18 month, really it was a 15 to 18 month sabbatical around the world. And we started with a road trip to Iowa. We spent time in Costa Rica, back in our hometown of Seattle for a little bit, and then Tahiti for a month, and then got to Australia. And, so 5 months, 150 days was everything we wanted, which is a challenging global experience, 4 to 6 weeks in these things. But I kept that second number, the 400 odd meltdowns, as a reminder to my kids that this was not all plain sailing. People are like, oh, it must be a dream out there. I'm like, no, there's 3 kids involved. There's nothing dreamy about this environment. But look, it was a magic experience. But it got tremendously curtailed, right? So we land in Australia, and on end of October, a week in Sydney with the girls, and then we arrived on November 1st. We're having breakfast with my mom, and I said, how you feeling, Mum? And she's like, oh, not well, actually, and hadn't perhaps received the treatment she needed, but it just became our full-time job, and we didn't know what was wrong at the point, but it went downhill. And then we just committed to pausing our trip, helping her through the surgery and the treatment, and hopefully a successful outcome. It hasn't turned out that way. As we finished treatment in March with her, I kind of bottomed out from a feeling about how this is all coming together. Our family was certainly struggling with what was going on. And we were actually kind of gear up for take Mum traveling. My sister, who I just mentioned, is now living in London, had baby number 1 2 weeks ago. So we were going to take Mum over and give her a summer in London and be with the baby, the newest addition, the 4th daughter. I've got 3 daughters, and my sister now has 1 daughter. But of course, then COVID hit. So look, a dream trip. We got to experience a chunk of it. We're so grateful for it, but certainly not the script. But I will say, and I included this slide just to be like, at the end of the day, these are the memories that I would take forward. These are the memories that I hope the girls can remember, from the turtles laying eggs on the beach in Costa Rica at Ostanal, to the swing on the beach that my daughter's there, to the Tahitian markets and the like. So that's the memories. I wrote this blog really, it became a passion project to give to the kids, and that was my motivation. But it had a side benefit of it stopped my email, so it gave friends and family a chance to follow us without having to update them, and it was a fun way of doing it. So jumping to, and I want to just check my time. Yep, jumping to hit the time in the US. I bucket it into these sort of groups. 2 college experiences: Columbus State University in Columbus, Georgia, Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. 2 business downturns: the 01 fallout from September 11th, and then the global financial crisis, which I really consider, for me, ran from 2005, fourth quarter 2005, through to the end of 2010. I was living in Atlanta, and then it moved from east to west in Australia, in the United States. And then I moved to Seattle in 2008, just as it was hitting the west coast of the United States. So it was that was a long run for us. And I spent, so the US, American cities that I've lived in or been based in, I've done a lot of travel during that with work, but Columbus, Georgia, in the southeast of the country, and Atlanta, Georgia. So that was about 10 years or 9 years. And then in Seattle, in the Pacific Northwest. And if you ever want an example, and you've got plenty on the news today, America really is that 50 countries stitched together by a very loose constitution. And you really, the difference between Atlanta and Seattle is amazing. The work experiences, and again, another overlap with the magnificent work Rotary does, but that included stints of CFO in real estate in Atlanta, which saw the global financial crisis driven by the housing issue and the valuation issues of Wall Street. They were taking us down some big deals in Florida that I was working on. And then when I got to Seattle in 2008, I was fortunate enough to work with Bill Gates' investment company and spent 4 years there. And again, I like to say, and this applies very much to you all as an amazing group of people, is the work you did with the foundation around polio and that around the world is the foundation are the wonderful people that deploy the money around the world, try to solve problems. I worked on the investment side, the investment company, which, you know, the other side of nice people might be bad people, but I would just say financially stewards of Bill's money, and we were there to protect the money, keep it very confidential, and frankly create a great return, risk-reward return for him and Melinda and their family. And so I spent a couple of years building out their real estate group and bringing all that internal, and then spending the last couple of years heading up all investment accounting for the entire $100-odd billion portfolio. Incredible experience, challenging environment. Very competitive, but an amazing experience to have in my career. And then spent the last 6 years with a firm called Bentel Kennedy, a Canadian-based firm with extensive US operations. And again, a ton of time on the road for me, traveling. I had teams, I based in Seattle with my family, but had teams in Toronto, Washington, DC, Chicago, San Francisco, and of course in Seattle. So lots of time on the road. And frankly, a life spent way too much at the office, but it's had some positives, and I've learned a lot of lessons. And then the passion projects, which we've just spoken about. One, I ran for office in the United States in 2016 as Washington State Treasurer. Essentially think about that as it's basically the same size state as New South Wales, and this is essentially that if the Treasurer of New South Wales was a directly elected by popular vote position, that's what that role is. And then I won through the primary in May, lost in the general election in November 2016. It was an 11-month education, I'll call it that. And then the 2018-19 Seattle Public Schools levy, there was a levy, $1.2 billion US levy that did a very ordinary job, and that's been polite, on qualifying equity of disadvantaged schools, of which my daughter happened to be at one of them. And I led a consortium to re-examine that, and against all odds, and it was just an amazing collaboration with a lot of people. We had them redo something they publicly launched and released to fix it, and it resulted in a bunch, close to $500 million of that 1.2 million heading down into the absolute most disadvantaged area of Seattle, and replacing a bunch of schools there. And it was an amazing experience, one that was a 1 in a million shot of winning. We won. I thought we were just going to try to help make the future better, but we made the present better, which was amazing. Jumping to Australia, where did it all begin? The born in Naracoorte, that's obviously where this story began today with Naracoorte News. This is where I grew up. I'm actually standing here. This is my sister's room in the same house that I was brought home to when I was born. So I came home because this is the quiet space and that I could do this talk today. But mum and dad still at the same house. Obviously, with all the treatment in Adelaide at Flinders, they haven't been here a lot in the last 6 months, but it's home. And, you know, as much as people don't know me much around here, they're getting to know me now again, but it's always been home. I went to high school in Adelaide at 13, massively homesick experience, but I share it just because, you know, it meant a lot of strain up and down. I can't tell you how many times I traveled up and down between Adelaide and Naracoorte. I did a little stint at University of Adelaide. I found after high school, I was trying to play tennis and study. It didn't work. I wasn't probably smart enough or mature enough. And also the system, of course, in Australia doesn't allow for sport, doesn't cater for it. And so those years I spent a lot of time playing field hockey and tennis. And, you know, I was really fortunate to be in a town of Naracoorte, which happened to be in a hot spot of tennis and hockey in the 80s when I was growing up. And I'm so grateful for the passion of my parents around it, the coaches in the township and the community. And I got that benefit. There's no question. And mum and dad drove me up and back to Adelaide. I mean, literally the year before I went to high school, when I was 11 and 12, those 2 years, I remember there was 26, 27 weeks in a row where mum and dad would drive me up for 3.5 hours to Adelaide and back. I can't, you know, imagine the strain that was placing on them and the money and the life, but I'm eternally grateful for it. And it launched my tennis career, which took, after I left at University of Adelaide prematurely, I went and played on the tour for 3 or 4 years, still based in Adelaide at Memorial Drive Tennis Club, working behind the bar, working in cleaning the grounds, the grandstands after the tournaments and the things, and coaching tennis around Adelaide while I played on the tour for 40 to 42 weeks of the year in Australia, the US, and Europe, and very unsuccessfully. But I'm excited to hear that you're talking to Darren Cahill in a couple of weeks. That guy is just an amazing person and an amazing, successful at what he does, and so humble, and he really is he is the real deal. So I'd like to open up for questions, Peter, if that's all right. I just want to say in finishing that I'm just so grateful, and thank you for your time. I'm grateful for your time. I'm grateful for the commitment that you all do to the community. It's a real pleasure to be here and share today. Hopefully there's some questions that I can answer, and anything that you can do to continue the work you do in the future is fantastic. Towns like Naracoorte can benefit just not only from local Rotary, but that statewide vision. And Adelaide always brings tremendous resources to everything in South Australia, and I think you have an amazing position to influence that. And for my own sanity, my wife is an American pediatrician. So for the two of us, she's working through accreditation, which, if anyone has been through those sorts of processes, is something that isn't in the top 17,000 things you'd like to do in your life, is go through an accreditation process. And I am figuring out, once I stand this project up and get that sustainability, you know, what opportunities I might be able to have and create, whether it's another startup or a business, or contribute to an organization. So just being on your radar is something that I'm grateful for. And there's my contact information. You're welcome to always reach out at any time. And I'd just like to say thank you again for having me.
It's our pleasure, Michael, and we'll publish those contact details in our bulletin, so that people, I'm sure there's many in the room who'd like to catch up. I'll get you to stop sharing the screen.
Yes.
So that we can see people. Great. and open it up for questions. Do I have any questions? Wave, yell, unmute. Joe Fiedler.
That was really great. I was just wondering if you have reached out to Bill Gates for sponsorship for the Narracott News.
I have not put the email in. That is one thing I really. It's funny. I should actually message the staff over there. I've gotten some good comments from them, and that is funny. I thank you for calling me out on that. I will do that.
That's the marketer in you, Joe.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's why I'm not a marketer. That's exactly right. That's mistake number 643 that I've made so far.
Any other questions? While we're, and also you can use the chat room function. Michael, you mentioned in your presentation the comment about the assumption that there's 50 homogenous one-size-fits-all states of America. And by way of a preamble, and I won't bore you, but I latched upon a book many years ago called The 9 Nations of America, where somebody tried to explain why people like Quaker Oats and Safeway and the big multinationals had failed trying to appeal to them, because essentially America is very different from state to state. Are there any analogies, similarities, comments that you'd wish to share in terms of lifestyle and social differences between states, both from your experience in the US and from what we're seeing here?
Yeah, look, obviously the current president has sort of taken hostage the rational discussion of any of these differences and nuances. But at the risk of flirting with that a little bit, the 6 to 9 state countries laid in America is very obvious. You've got the West Coast, the Northeast, the Southeast, and the Midwest, and then you've got Texas, which quite rightly claims its own country anyway. So, and I would argue that just the whole role of the Union against the United States, and that's really all it is, and people misunderstand that. And the federal government has the ability to tax, and it has the ability to fight wars, military, and it gains a lot of power by using the taxation tool and saying, look, we'll give you a couple billion, but you got to do education this way, right? Like, that's how they leverage their power, which the states have then become hostage to that on their own givings, and then now they can't decouple from it. So it's a real basket case. But I'll tell you one thing, that if I could give any advice to people following America, I think it's not my quote, but it's a really good analogy, is that Republicans, so the right or the Liberal Party in Australia equivalent, take Trump seriously, not literally. And the Democrats on the far left, the Labor Party of Australia equivalent, take Trump literally, not seriously. And I would argue that neither of those positions are super helpful when you stay far out there in the polarized. If you can just look behind it and look at the policies and then have good critical debate, and that's been missing from America for a long time, and it's just gotten progressively worse over the last 20, 30 years that I've been there. I don't know if that helps, Peter, but I'm happy to dive in. But I'm really sad for what it's going through. At the same time, so many great friends that we talk to all the time. Life in suburban America isn't different. It's the same today. Americans have a very different way of expressing themselves. They look at destruction of property as a right, and it's an expression, a form of expression. It is not an Australian form of expression, and it's much more horrific to an Australian audience. In America, it's part and parcel. You saw it with, you can't point to an event in American history in the last 100 years that hasn't involved turning cars over, burning buildings, and the like. It's just, it's part of the MO. Whether you agree with it or not, I just want to let you know it's viewed very differently there.
Yes, the right to be silly is almost comes before the First Amendment.
Yep, absolutely.
And cars are cheap.
Yeah, they are too. They are very cheap. That's so true. So is petrol. That's right.
Now, I've got to preface this next question, Michael. It's coming from a local or former local, so it could be some tricky stuff here.
Right.
David Egan.
Thanks, Peter, and congratulations, Michael, on your story. It's I know when I lived in Narracrua, I lived there for 10 years, from age 7 to 17, and by the time I got around about 17, I think I was sort of glad to sort of leave, because a lot of people thought that Narracrua was the centre of the earth and that nothing else existed. And, you've proved otherwise significantly. It's a wonderful story. Thanks for sharing it. I'm just wondering, we do have another person on our on side here today who lectures in entrepreneurship, and I'm sure he'll probably have an interesting comment to make about your story. It's just wonderful, inspirational. But I'm just wondering, your mother's maiden name. I left 10 years before you were born, so I may not know her, but
Probably do Banger.
oh yeah,
Yeah, Bob Banger and William Norman before that. They were both mayors of District Council of Narracrua. Or
yeah, I remember the name
farmers,
Banger. Yeah,
farmers out in France.
Francis. Yeah, that's right. But we also used to have a member in our Rotary Club here by the name of Brian Waite. Is he in any relation to you?
I don't think so, but yeah. I'll claim him if he's a good person. I'm happy to jump on that.
He was a nice bloke.
Yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much for your, lovely to hear the story of Narracrua and what you're doing, because the Narracrua Herald was just, I know growing up, we used to look every week to see we're in the footy team or not, and Richard Peake, he was about my era. He's the guy that's probably advising you, is he?
He is. I gave him a piece of the company, and you know, he is. I have benefited so much from his wisdom, and I'm now at the point where I'm probably frustrating him more than he's enjoying helping me, because we're kind of deviating from the old traditional model. But we couldn't be here without him. Like the first 6-7 weeks, you know, that kind of counts.
And his father was a wonderful community citizen as well. And
yes,
so it's wonderful what you're doing for the town. I'm sure the local people absolutely love it. Well done.
The response has been amazing. I'll say one. Oh, sorry, Peter.
Let's go, Michael. Yeah.
I was going to say that just to build on David's question, comment there. The story around the printer is literally we couldn't find a printer in we didn't have a printing press in Narracrua. That's fine. We're too small a town. These things are big and expensive. The nearest one, I won't name it, but refused to do it. Again, small. This is why this industry, traditional, is struggling, because even though they're laying off people, I'm like, we will do it whenever you want us to do it. They're like, no, we don't want to do it. Competitor, whatever. I was like, okay, whatever. Even though they weren't competing in the market. How we got to the printer in Mount Barker at the Courier is Richard Peake's dad did his first cadetship with Neil Marston at the Courier in Mount Barker. So I called a guy called Steve Marston, who I just pulled his name off the website. I said, Steve, you don't know me. I'm calling because Harry Peake knew your dad. Actually, your dad employed him to do a cadetship 50 plus years ago, 60 years ago. This guy was just like, hey, is this a joke? And but anyway, he's printing out paper. And if anyone has time to watch the Landline link on a story they did on us, they started with the printing guys in Mount Barker and did a wonderful job. And Steve is just the most genuinely authentic bloke, grandson of Neil Marston, and just continuing the tradition of that paper and as a wonderful tribute, and just a wonderful person. So now we're just making it a partnership that will just make it work. So,
fantastic. Can you pass on my regards to Richard?
I will for sure. Thanks, David.
Thanks, David. Which probably leads into another question that may be on people's minds. Michael, is you mentioned in your presentation the future planning and perhaps the resurgence of the Herald. Have you in some way broken the mould for communities and community newspapers?
I don't know. I think it's too early to say. I will say, by virtue of the stories that were done on us being, I think the only difference between us and others is we were just so quick and so early, right? And that was purely because probably I had nothing else to do, and we just poured ourselves into it. But I'm sending, if you take the last 10 days, I send 2 to 5 emails a day with all my templates and all my files that I've prepared so far in community news, in membership and letters and sponsorship letters and pro forma Excel file, you know, so I'm just, and that's from all over the country. So the quick answer is, I think there's something there. I think the reflection of, again, I'm a corporate person, like my background is corporate. There's a role where corporations do wonderful work and wonderful impact. This one just hasn't been it. And they've just lost their way. And so a return to grassroots community, I think I do think there's a wonderful road forward. And it'll be very interesting. If ACM's good enough, news has already shown that they're not going to try. But if ACM really put their energy into it, they have the resources and the capabilities, and the country certainly has the journalists available to do it. But that she wears the energy to really get invested in communities, that takes a unique corporation.
So do you regard yourself as being a disruptor?
I will let others decide. Look, what I will say is disruptive to the current status quo of an industry that's very broken and very lost. It's not client-centered at all. And I look at the client as the community, and the advertising, the sponsors. This has completely lost its focus on client. But if you went back 30 years ago, we're just replicating a lot of what was done, and I'm just fortunate enough to have, you know, the US model has a lot of strengths of community fundraising for local media and local public radio and local TV and local news. So I saw how well that model worked in so many communities across America. So disruptor to the corporates that are doing it right now, I would call it the opposite for the community, right? It's actually knitting the community back together. As people keep saying to me on the road, we're talking about each other again. We're talking to each other again. Like, and that feels good when people are saying that.
Yeah. The risk of sharing a personal anecdote on that focus on the customer. In the mid-'80s, I spent a month in the US with a client of mine, Coles Supermarkets, and we toured right round, and we spent some time. And in the period we're talking about, the evening newspapers were dying all around the world. It was the mornings were okay, but the evening paper was dying. The only one that we could discover that was actually making a difference, I think, was the San Francisco Chronicle, and their evening newspaper was going gangbusters. So we had a meeting with them, and I just simply said, "What is it? What research have you done to, you know, what's the secret for your success of building circulation?" And the marketing director was a lovely fellow, said, "I simply went out into the street and spoke to people, and realized that our last edition finished before people in the American system in those days, which you finished work and you went to a bar and had a cocktail, and then you caught the BART in San Francisco home. And our last edition went out before people came out of the bars. And so all they did was change their editions so that as people came out of their bars and went to the station, they picked up a copy of the paper."
Perfect.
Because they'd missed the evening network news.
Yeah.
So that concept of actually grassroots, and I know Zing Hard, who's on board today, would relate to that. It's actually nothing like getting out and actually talking to people.
Yeah. It's a lot simpler when you do it.
Yeah. Questions? Any waves? Comments?
It's Kay.
Yes, Kay.
I'm just wondering how Michael's wife is coping in Australia, apart from her accreditation, which I know is very difficult. Is she enjoying being here and the children at school?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's kind of a mixture of feelings, a real mixed emotion. As I said, I bottomed out in March. She's kind of bottomed out in May, and that was two things driving that. One was we never planned on stopping in Australia for a long time. We weren't moving countries when we started our trip. So, and I remember doing that in the US numerous times, having homesickness waves. And so that one hit hard. And second is you know, you probably have it, maybe someone on the school has a better word for it, but for me, I call it just loss of choice. Like every other time in our life, even with me in America, I knew I could get home in 24 hours, right? If something went wrong, I just go to the airport and start catching planes, right? And I'll be home. That's not the case today, right? Like you've got quarantines, it's hard to get on a flight, and you've got quarantines and the like. And so those two things together have really, yeah, it's a period of reflection, and we do not have it figured out, and we're not in that happy space that we were 5-6 months ago when we were traveling around the world together. We're just trying to help each other through it, and then the kids. It's always funny. You always like we kid ourselves about like, well, what should we do for the kids? The kids are 20%, 200% more resilient and better adapting than we are, and it's just such a good lesson in life, over and over and over. They keep proving us superior adapters, and so we've got our 7-year-old at school in McLaren Vale. She's catching the bus on her own, 45 minutes from Normanville. We're just like, oh my God, we couldn't let her cross the road in Seattle because there's 26,000 cars between us and the school. And, you know, here she is just jumping on a bus and going for 45 minutes each way. But she's doing that. And then our 4-year-old is a couple of days a week at kindy in Yankalilla. We didn't expect to be in Narracor. This wasn't in the plan. So we're just getting through the end of this term, and then we'll sort of see what's going on. And then Women's and Children's Hospital are taking a real interest in her in Adelaide. So maybe there's a pathway there. And I've got these businesses, we'll see. So it's a very jumbled answer, but it's very authentically, we are jumbled right now and we're off balance. We're definitely off balance. So.
Well, my nephew's in Los Angeles and we're worried about their safety. So, and of course, we've got the same problem. We can't go backwards and forwards if something arises.
Yeah. Well, I can hopefully set your mind at ease that suburban America, it's fine. And it's everyone's hunkered down and doing all that.
That's what he tells us.
Yeah, no, and it's true. My house in Seattle is less than 2 kilometers from downtown, where the entire new city is popping up, and it's been that way. There's been a homeless camp there for 2,000 people, less than half a kilometer away from our house. Again, it's been fine. Like it's a social problem that the city has failed to address successfully, but it from a harmony of a community and that it's been amazing. So,
thanks, Kay. It was a great question. I was glad you asked. I was wondering what was happening with the girls and whether they were missing friends or whatever. So
we do get a bit of it. We do get a bit of it, but the country Normanville environment where they can ride their bikes around, they're seeing the kangaroos. I mean, there's some real pluses. But yeah, no one's perfect in this. Like I said, that meltdown count was strikingly real from our trip. So, if I kept it going, we'd be well over 1,000 at this point. But we're going there.
Coincidentally, I was born at Yankalilla.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. So Yankalilla Bakery is one of our favourite stops, and points of bribery for our kids' behaviour.
It's one of David Mottram's favourite spots too, I think.
Yes, I think so.
He's waving. You're clocking up some miles, Michael.
Yeah, just buzzing between family in Normanville, and my mum and dad obviously travel up and down, but it depends when appointments are there so that they can get to Flinders University Hospital and Narracor. And I bring the paper back most Tuesday nights now, just as we still have a logistics problem that until I get the ACM re-entry sorted out, I don't want to change the distribution model. And just keep our client, again, it's about the client, right? Keep the client in the rhythm. And so I bring the paper down Tuesday. That's why I'm tired tonight. I drive from 7:30. They print it after they print the courier. So they finished about 7 or 8 p.m. last night. I drive, I pick it up in Mount Barker, drive to Narracor, drop it off at a couple of spots on the way, get here about 11:30 midnight, get up at 2:45, meet the newsagent down in Narracor. We load up the papers and roll them. And he's got this 1950s rolling machine that wraps the plastic around it. It's really cool. Totally dangerous. There's no way I'd get near it. Like literally, I'd lose my finger. And then he goes off, and to his credit, he goes off and drives for 3 hours, 150 kilometers to deliver 200 newspapers. And we've made the rate competitive, like giving 50 to 75 cents. That one's $1 for the home deliveries. Do $1 an issue because the model that these newspapers, like the advertisers, squeeze them down to 12 cents a paper. Like, it just makes no sense, right? In a rural environment, it's again where rural people just get crushed by all these services that just aren't available. But anyway, that's the story of fatigue right now. So I'm on 2 hours of sleep and about to sort of, I still walk into walls today.
But I don't think I think we're about towards the end. One last question. You in your commentary and interview with Landline, which was a great story, and I recommend people to go online and look at iView and have a look at it. It's a lovely story. You mentioned that each successive issue you've increased circulation. How's it going at the moment? Yeah,
amazing. If we are, the old Herald was at 1600 when they finished up. I printed 1700 the first week, just nervous. Like, oh, most people don't know there's a new paper. I mean, there was a little buzz around people that did know it, but no one knows. We sold out in 36 hours. This week, I printed 2,500, so we're up 47%. And I think I've got 2 more main distribution points that will get us up close to 3,000. And if we can successfully pull that off, that'll put us back to literally the heyday of the peak, which is right around 3,100, 21 years ago. And I do it not because that's the ego for me. I do it because that means we've gotten to everybody that wants it. That's it. There's just nothing else. Like, it's like, no, right now we're still failing at putting it in a place where people that normally just live their life can get to it easily. And there's 2 more points that I know are a problem that'll give us a couple of hundred more each. And then, and a few just distribution things as we work it out. But it's a little puzzle and we're figuring it out. But gee whiz, that we're so grateful for that community.
Thank you, Michael. All power to you. We've almost run out of time, but it's been a great story, well told, and thank you for those that chimed in to help Michael flesh that out. This year, it's our tradition to thank all of our speakers, Michael, to make a donation in their name to the End Polio campaign. So I've now got on the screen a certificate, which the original copy, not the scan, will come to you in the mail tonight as a gesture of thanks for giving of your time, and after a long drive and doing all the things that washing the dishes is to do, I suppose, as a publisher. All power to you, as I said. I think it's the sort of disruption that we need to see more of, because I think it's actually resonating with communities and true communities. So thank you, and I'll ask Andrew to unmute, and we'll.
I can't.
Okay, we'll ask people to unmute or just simply clap hands in the silent way. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for that. And the work you're doing in polio is world famous. We know that, but it is amazing. So congrats again.
Our pleasure. Back to you, Andrew.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. That was an excellent few half an hour spent together and learning about your story. A special thank you also to all our Rotarian friends and other guests for joining us today and for supporting this online meeting format. We hope to see you again soon. And next week, as I mentioned earlier, will be our very special changeover meeting. Please do not forget that the meeting will start at 12:45, so 15 minutes earlier. I hope to see you all here next week to celebrate this very special occasion. I will now close today's meeting. Thank you for being with us. Hope to see you next week. Have a great week. Stay safe and goodbye.